Yo guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I am breaking down the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And basically he speaks about why ego is such a dangerous thing and why it should be avoided at all costs and why you should never confuse ego as a good thing, which I had a debate with one of my friends yesterday. Shout out the business kid. And I think it is quite true because once you actually define ego, which I'll do in a second, you sort of realize why ego is purely a negative thing. And then if you thought about confidence is sort of like the opposite of ego. Ego is sort of like an unwarranted, it's sort of like confidence, but without being earned and with no logical backing behind it. Sort of just feeling like you're going to be successful and feeling like you deserve X, Y, and Z. And it's sort of just a sense of entitlement. It's like, for example, if there were two generals and one of them had worked all his life to get his army and he built his army, he recruited every single one of them, but then there was another kid who was spoiled and his dad, who was very rich and powerful, gave him his army. One of them may have very high confidence in their army and the other one in their army and themselves, and then the other one may have very low confidence but a huge ego with their army. This is just an example. It's probably not even a good example, but yeah. So basically, ego and confidence, I think, can easily be misconstrued because yesterday with the debate I was having with my friend is he thought that ego could be a way that you could show your, it could help you do all kinds of things. Like it could basically show that you trust yourself. But the thing is, I think he was confusing confidence with ego because yes, if you Google ego, yeah. But so basically one of the major things that I thought really touched on me in the book was the fact that you should always be consistently be a student. And this is something that I struggle with a lot because a lot of the time with fitness, for a long time with fitness, I thought that I had most of it down. Like I thought I had most of the ideas solid. I thought, oh yeah, got this sort of rep range and you want to hit it hard, hit compounds first, eat this kind of stuff, eat a lot. But the thing is, I wasn't eating a lot, and I wasn't training hard enough, but also smart enough. I wasn't training hard and smart. But one thing that really changed that was when I started to actually become a student and listen to people who do know more than me and accept that people do know more than me. Because until you do that, you cannot learn. Because if you start to think, hey, I know everything, there's nothing else to learn in this topic, then you can never learn in that topic because you'll never be open to learning in that topic. So like in general, Ryan Holiday sort of says you really should always be a student in every single thing you do because why not? And also if you consider yourself the cream of the crop, you're not going to stay the cream of the crop, even if you are, because there's other people below you who don't consider themselves that, and they're just going to be learning and getting better while you are stagnant because you have nothing more to learn. And if you have nothing more to learn, that means you do it 100% efficiently. You never do anything wrong. Like it's perfection. So it's basically impossible. You are always a student. And I think this is very important because especially when it comes to uni, for studying, I thought I had it down. I thought I just had to study harder. And that was the thing that I had to do better. But I found this year that if I studied smarter by incorporating study methods that actually made a huge difference, which were harder, they were harder study methods, and I was resistant to them at first, but I found the more I did them, and the more I didn't resist the more I resisted that urge to just go and write easy notes, and I actually did stuff like I did cue cards, I answered hard questions, all that kind of stuff, which actually makes a huge impact compared to writing notes. I found that I was learning a lot more, and I also found the more I saw the people in my class as above me in this topic, the more I sort of rose to a higher level in this topic. I'm doing podiatry at uni, if you're wondering. So like for me, I found I'm trying to, as much as possible, try and learn something from everyone, because even if there's a lot of people that you don't quote unquote respect and you don't think, oh wow, what can I learn from them? They're at a lower level than me. The problem with thinking that is like, yes, maybe in some areas you might be better at them at something, but no matter who they are, there's always going to be something you can learn from them. And it doesn't even matter where you are, because, for example, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you're into all that kind of stuff and you consider yourself an entrepreneur, one thing that you can just learn from other people is just things that entrepreneurs wouldn't think about, because a lot of them do talk about stuff that isn't realistic. And one thing that I've learned from people who don't want to work 12 hours a day. They do want to just chill and relax. I love working a lot of the time, which is probably bad, but I don't really mind it because it's something that a lot of the work I'm doing, I'm enjoying. But one thing that you can learn from people who don't want to work 12 hours a day is they can teach you how to relax. And I've slowly been learning that from my girlfriend Layla. Is she doesn't want to work 12 hours a day. She still just wants that time to just chill. And some entrepreneurs think, oh, you must hustle 24/7. But I think the more and more you hang out with people, but you also keep your entrepreneurial mindset, the more you sort of realize relaxation is a good thing. That's why I've gone and bought a PlayStation 4, but that's sort of beside this point. We went over that on my last podcast. Check it out with Chent Thambia and Lancaster Fitness. It was a good one. And I'm trying to use that as sort of a tool of relaxation, but go check that out over there. But I think this book is really good for me because this was my second time reading this book. I listened to it on Audible, and the thing that the reason it's so good for me is because there was a time in my life when I thought I knew everything about most things. I thought I was this genius 18-year-old, but no, there's a lot of stuff that you need to be humble about, and you need to be genuinely vulnerable about. And that's something that I found, even just socially, being vulnerable to people and showing that you are not Jesus, and just showing them where you're weak. It just increases. It's just when you show someone how weak you are in a certain area, and you show vulnerability, then they want to trust you more. And it works a charm if you do want to become someone's friend. It's not always going to work, but for me, if I do want to get closer to someone, I just show them places that I'm vulnerable, and I show them things that I'm not good at, and that things that I'm insecure about. Because, yeah, one thing with this book, Ego is the Enemy, is though, like, they include a podcast with Tim Ferriss at the end of the audiobook, and Ryan touches on then that, like, he knows that, like, he has to be judged a lot now that he's in the public eye, and he's just written a book about ego, so now he has to be this perfect human being. But even though after reading this book, it's very impossible to adhere to these, I guess, laws in a way. They're not really laws, but just sort of the principles given in this book consistently, because we are just human. But I do think that reading this book and sort of actually trying to take it in, because the first time I read it, I sort of just listened to it. I didn't actually take it in. I didn't absorb the actual words. I was just sort of letting it go through, say, oh yeah, I'll just have it in the background. I didn't, like, I thought I was listening to it, but And then this time through, I made sure to actually sit down and do nothing else but just sit there and listen to each chapter. And I found that really helped me learn more with every chapter, because I felt like other times it's just playing, but now if I'm taking notes and making a few notes each chapter and just saying the key points, I find you do actually learn a lot more. So one of the things that I thought is also a great thing to touch on, which I didn't really understand at first, but then the more and more the chapter went on, it made more sense to me, was it said to not be passionate. And I was like, why? Why should you not be passionate? How does that work? Basically, the gist of it was, if you are starting this new project and you are extremely passionate about it, and you think, wow, this is going to be the best thing ever, this is going to be so cool, I'm going to do this and this and this and this, but you haven't actually taken any action, and you haven't gone on, you might not stay on that path of consistent long-term action, then it's not going to make an impact if the first 5 minutes is hard-hitting passion. And that's sort of the main thing that touched on, because, and I thought it also ties into these other points as well. In the long term, you do want to do consistent work, and you want to have, I think another thing that Gary Vee says that this ties into quite well is macro patience, micro speed. So you want to work hard every day, but you just want to let what happens, because if you start going into it all passionate and thinking, oh wow, I'm going to start this podcast and it's going to get 10,000 listeners, like, you've got to slow it down. You've got to be realistic, because a lot of the stuff is just stuff that you just have to keep doing, and eventually something will crack. And if it doesn't crack, then you just move on to something else, and then that might crack, and then that might crack. Like, you've got to sort of just keep going. One thing that I also think ties into that is you want to quietly work. Like, for instance, when I first started my Instagram, I thought it would be better to display all the work I'm doing all the time to show people how much I work. But it's like, if you're showing every time you're working, when you are working and you're not showing it, then people are just going to think you're being lazy. And also, it's sort of telling you that in a way you're working to show other people, but you've got to get to a point where you're working purely for you and you're not working for anyone else or anyone's expectations of how much you should be working, which is something I struggle with a bit, because I think a lot of the time being a student entrepreneur is you feel like you're not doing enough work, and you feel like you're not being enough of an entrepreneur. We discussed this in my last podcast as well, but I think it's something quite strange, because you're working as much as you can or you want to, and much as you will permit before letting the other light bulbs in your life go out, sort of thing. Like, there's this little thing where you have 4 light bulbs, you have family, you have being social, fitness, and work, and then you've got to balance those light bulbs. You only have 100 watts for all the light bulbs, and you've got to sort of balance them. And I think at times you've got to let some other light bulbs die if you really want other light bulbs to thrive, and you really want them to get bright. So yeah. One of the things I also think is why you should work in quiet and not tell people what you're doing if you are working on something, is not say, hey guys, look at me. And even just to your close friends, this is not just applied to social media, but even just to your close friends, like, say, oh yeah, I like, something that I'm quite guilty of is I will book someone that I think is quite prestigious, and I will book them there, but I haven't recorded the podcast yet, and I haven't actually got it there. Like, there was a certain quite large fitness personality, and I booked him on the podcast. I've tried to book him on twice. He's like, yeah, keen, and then he didn't show up. And then there was another time he was like, yeah, keen, I'll see you there, remind me 2 days before. I reminded him, didn't show up again. And before I had even booked the first podcast, I had gone and told my girlfriend. I'd be like, oh my god, blah blah blah, and then she's like, wow, good on you. And the thing that's happening there is she is congratulating me before I've actually done anything. All I've done is sent an email, and it's like, that does not equate an actual podcast episode with this person. So yeah, I think you shouldn't, it's not just on social media, but I think it also is on social media. Like, if you've done something great and you want to be like congratulated for it, cool, but that also does go against the principles in this book, because you don't want to ever be relying on other people's congratulations as your motivation, because it needs to just come from the sort of idea of why you work in this book is sort of, it's almost like saying you're working because you're unworthy, and like, if you start to believe that you deserve all the success, then you're not going to get it, because in a way it basically says you have to put in as much work as anyone else, and there is no reason why you deserve anything unless your work is truly good and the market actually creates a demand for it. Because it's like, you just because you have, and the thing with the book is, if you've had success in a few other areas, the thing that Ryan also talks about a lot is he thinks this book is really essential if you've had success in an area, like, say you're a rapper and you've had amazing success in the rapping industry. He used Kanye as an example. So he said Kanye West, huge success in the music industry, absolutely just a beast, absolutely slays it there. But then he goes into the fashion industry with the same ego and the same confidence. And maybe in the music industry it's confidence because he's worked in quiet for years and he's built up that confidence because of what he's done. And he's done amazing things because he's followed, not knowingly from reading this book, but just from doing these sort of things, like not telling people every time he writes a new song, like not telling people not asking for congratulations all the time, and just sort of working consistently and quiet, and then eventually achieving greatness. But now in the fashion industry, he's gone into that and taken that same ego, yet he hasn't been working in quiet for all these years. Like, yeah, I'm sure he works hard. He's done great with his Yeezys, but his new fashion collection, it's not working because he's been millions in debt for it, because he has carried his ego into that. So yeah. And it's just, you don't want to, that's one of the main key points of this book, is taking, if you are successful in another area, don't take that success into another area. Just leave that confidence where it belongs. And also, they do think, this is something that he touches on that I think is quite important. He touches on it quite near the end of the book. So it's to make use of dead time and to cast your bucket wherever you are. So say, for example, if you are in a situation where you do not think you can start a certain thing, the thing is, I'll use a very specific example. If you want to start a podcast, but you only have your iPhone and a pair of Apple earphones, I guarantee you can start a podcast that is like, excluding audio quality, you can basically make a podcast. Like the only thing you really need is just to somehow upload it, and that can be done with just a shitty computer. So you pretty much just need a shitty computer to upload that content. So that's pretty much all you need. You just need an iPhone and you need your headphones. But there's a lot of people thinking that I cannot start a podcast now because I don't have a Blue Yeti, I don't have a good microphone. Say, for example, if you don't have a gym near you and you don't have a gym membership, just start gymming anyway, because it's like, you can wait till the situation is perfect, but it's never going to be perfect. Like, you could wait until you feel perfect to start training for that half marathon, but you might as well just start today, because what is the point of waiting just because you don't have the absolute efficient thing? If you have other stuff that you need to be doing, then cool, wait until it is a good time. But I think the idea of casting your net where you are is very important, because you should not just be waiting for the perfect time, because it's never going to be the right time. It's never going to just present this perfect opportunity to you. You've just got to make that opportunity, and it'll eventually feel like it was the perfect opportunity. So yeah, this book almost becomes my Bible in times where I start to let my ego get a hold, and I start to just believe that I deserve all these things, and I start to get impatient, and I start to think, oh, why don't I have 2,000 listeners every episode? Like, why don't I have A pluses? Like, the thing is, the more work you put in, the less you will feel like you deserve it. I mean, the more you should feel like you deserve it, but it's like, the more you'll realize that, like, you didn't deserve it back then, and that is very important, because if everyone was just handed shit, no, it wouldn't be worth anything. So the idea is you've got to work for it, and it's going to be a lot harder than you think, which is something that he tries to stress a lot, is the things that you should be scared of your work. Like, this podcasting scares me because it is almost unfathomable for me to see myself getting major money off AdWords from this, just because it's like, I don't know, there's just something about making actual money online from doing something like podcasting. It just scares me because it's something that I can't see myself doing easily, and it's not something that I can see myself just achieving very easily. But yeah, I do think that's what you should be doing. Like, the thing with university is I tried to pick a degree that I knew I was interested in, but was actually hard for me, because there's a lot of career choices where people get to a point where they are bored by their career and they fucking hate it. And if it's challenging you and you're enjoying the challenge, then you're not going to get bored by it. So I think like, this book can apply in so many ways to your general life, and I think it's a book that generally, like, it helped me a lot. Another one of his books, Obstacle is the Way, it has a very another one of Ryan's books, it has a very similar sort of premise. But, like, I think this one is probably my favorite, because it's sort of like a slap in the face, and it tells you, you don't deserve X, Y, and Z, and you have to work for it, and you have to be able to control your tempers. And you can, another thing that I think you need to touch on is the people like Steve Jobs and I don't even know who else. There's all these people that he mentioned that have this huge ego, and you think, oh wow, they are successful because of their huge ego. It's more, wow, they're successful in spite of their huge ego. Their huge ego was one of the main things holding them back. Because when you think of Steve Jobs, everyone thinks, wow, he is a creative genius, but they also think, fuck, he was horrible to work with, and he made so many people leave. And yes, if like the thing is, if you got his perfectionism without the being a cunt, like being a dickhead, then you're not going to have all those issues with people wanting to leave and people just hating working with him, people being stressed all the time. And maybe diamonds are created under pressure, but it's like, you cannot run a business like that, and it's not sustainable. And then once Steve leaves, it's just this huge hole of a company. And it was for a while, but now I think it is regaining my strength. I'm a huge Apple fanboy. Apple rep it till death. Yeah, like when you read his book, you start to think, oh wow, his ego was such a positive. But then when you apply ego as the enemy to it, and you look at how his ego actually tore him down and didn't actually build him up instead, then you realize it's not really like that. And you don't want to have a huge ego, because like, people that have a huge ego and they are extremely ambitious and they're extremely hardworking, I guarantee if they took that ego out and they just they tried to apply the lessons in this book, they would achieve a lot more, especially with people, because people can't stand someone that thinks that Jesus, like, people can't stand that. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This was sort of just a different kind of thing, because I don't know, I'm wanting to get into regularly scheduled content. I've wanted to do something with books for a long time, just because I really like books, and especially audiobooks, because especially when you touch on dead time here, if you don't listen to audiobooks or podcasts, then you I don't know what you're doing, because if you don't want to buy audiobooks, cool, they're not that expensive, but it's like, I understand that it's just something that you don't want to spend money on, but one, it's an investment in you. Two, podcasts are free, so it's like you can listen to all the educational podcasts, and you can download them onto your phone, and then just like, you don't need to pay a cent for them. And there's all these great podcast players. If you're looking for a good podcast player, I would recommend Overcast. That's my favorite one. Or even just use your normal podcast player. I think the Podcast Addict is a good podcast player as well, but I've never really used it. But yeah, I really liked this book. I would recommend you read this book, but yeah, I recommend you have to read it with an open mind, and you have to genuinely try and see where your ego is getting ahead of you. And it's not like just a social thing. Don't just take it in the social, oh wow, I think I'm God in the social structure. No, you've got to take it in a work structure as well, and also in a fitness structure, because you can't just be thinking, oh, if you do apply it to the area of fitness and you apply it to the area of work, then you can see where it interacts there. Because for myself, I found that I was ego lifting a lot of the time, and I found it didn't take this book for me to realize that, but also with work, I found my ego is getting ahead of me a lot of the time in work. And generally this book, I think it just helps you sort of stay grounded if you actually take in the principles. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Student Side Hustle. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.